So, welcome back. Hope you had a great lunch. And in the afternoon slot or part of a conference, we'll have 3 presentations, which will be 2 physical and 1 will be movie, because Alex is still in Ukraine. And we're going to start with Martin Howitt, who's from DataPlace, the organization, which we worked with before, and we know them, and just by the name, they are perfect fit for this conference as well. And we've seen Charles' presentation about the creative bureaucracy, and Martin was a bureaucrat before. So my opening question would be, what's this life? And why did you change?
So I joined public service in 1990, and that lasted until about 2014. There's some very, very inspiring and committed people working in municipalities, and I hope to say I was one of them. But over time, it kind of wears you out. You burn out a little bit. I think that if you find a good creative bureaucrat, you need to keep hold of them. And you need to look after them a bit. Everything has its lifespan. I'll talk a bit about that later on in the course.
Okay. Thank you very much. Looking for your presentation and see how data and open data works in the real life. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mikhail. And thank you all for having us here. I can't see anyone out there, but I'm sure there's a lot of you. This talk is called Open Cities, Building Citizen-Led Data Infrastructure. This is about our experiences, really, of working with different municipal areas on smart cities, open data and transformation projects. I work for and co-founded with my colleague Lucy here, a company called the DataPlace. We're a social enterprise that's based in Plymouth in the UK, southwest of the UK. Plymouth is a city about the same size, population-wise, as Košice, and it's got about 260,000 people in it. It's a much smaller geographic area. It's much more compact. It's on the ocean. It's got a proud naval history, and it's also much less green and much more compact than Košice, which looks beautiful and has an enormous hinterland of green spaces. Plymouth doesn't have those, and it's quite important to think about that as we go through. So we started out in 2016, 17, as open data consultants. We built an open data platform for the city. We worked with the local municipality to help them release more of their data. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. There's 4 of us, plus associates who come and go as the work goes. We are a social enterprise, which means that we have a commercial model, but we also do grant-funded work, including some UIA work as well. Great. We were last here in 2020, just before the pandemic started. Lucy and Simon, who's one of the other directors, ran a week-long boot camp for sort of civic hackers and civic organisations in the city. It's a massive honour to be back here after 3 years and to be part of the ending of this project as well as being around nearer the beginning. This is a slide of one of the bits of work we did. We do design-led type work. A lot of paper prototyping happened, and also some data-driven things. And we were back yesterday working with Creative Industries Košice team, doing some data ecosystem mapping, which Lucy led, which seemed fascinating. So, a little bit about me. Yes, I worked in municipalities. I've had a variety of technical roles. In the last few years, that's branched out into running a social enterprise, which is more rewarding and more stressful, but I'm much happier now than I was when I was a creative bureaucrat. And we've been working in kind of open data and smart cities consulting over the last couple of years. When we say smart cities, we don't mean smart cities like Cisco means smart cities, or one of the big technology providers. We are talking about people, and I'll talk about that a bit later on as well. So these are the things that we believe, and I want to try and demonstrate some of these during this afternoon. So we think that participation is the key in order to make change happen and for that change to last. We believe in empowering individual communities to design their own data assets and to be involved in their own data, which is a change from the way things are normally brokered with community groups. And our experiences have been coloured, really, because in the UK, over the last 15 years or so, municipalities have lost about 50% of their budgets. And that has meant that top-down funding has been in increasingly short supply. And in the last few years, we've also lost EU funding for obvious reasons. And so that has also been in short supply. And so communities have needed ways of doing things in a more low-tech kind of approach. And they've also needed to use their own assets in a smarter and a more agile kind of way. Platforms and those things come and go, but communities endure. A bunch of other things there. We think that municipalities have a role in plugging the small gaps that make the big projects happen. And something Petra, I think, mentioned was that ground up things, for example, in community gardens, they need a bit of help from the top down kind of approach in order to be sustainable. We've got some examples of that as well. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is the data technologies. This is not a technology presentation, you'll be pleased to know. I want to talk a bit about data as well, data assets. Again, this is not a very data-centric presentation. Mostly I want to talk about people, and I also want to echo some of the governance conversations that were in earlier speakers. So very quickly then, data technology, data infrastructure. What do we mean by that? As was part of the title of the talk. These are data assets supported by people, processes, and technology. That's a definition from the Open Data Institute, which is based in London. We mean technology, data, stewarding and management resources, and governance. Those are the sorts of things that together. What's in the technology layer in particular? Well, there are connectivity technologies, so networks in particular. There are processing technologies, ways to get the data out of those networks and into meaningful places to be worked on. And then there are platforms that process and visualize that data. Very briefly, one of those things at a time. So there have been a lot of focus over the last few years, and it's been well rehearsed about getting, especially in the UK, about getting fibre into premises, fibre into homes, fibre into businesses. The next growth area here, we think, though, is around mobile sensor networks, low bandwidth, low power networks, things like LoRaWAN, NB-IoT, Sigfox. There are a lot of these things. And now, as a general rule, every time I mention a technology, there are 4 or 5 others that are there just waiting to be used instead. There's a lot of choice in technology land, and especially in open source technologies, choice is not the problem. There are other boundaries and hurdles to getting in to use them. So this is a map of LoRaWAN coverage in Plymouth. We managed to work with a couple of other collaborators, and we've put in 5 gateways in Plymouth. The green dots are places where people have cycled, walked, driven, with a sensor, a signal strength sensor in their car or on their bike or just holding it, and taken readings. If it's green, there's a strong network signal there. If it's red, it's poor. If it's amber, it's in the middle. If there's no readings at all, it just means they haven't measured that place. It doesn't mean that there isn't an actual signal there. Now, 5 gateways, just for comparison, this is quite a low-cost infrastructure. They cost around about €600 each, or about £600 current exchange rates. So it's quite cheap. And Plymouth is very hilly. So I noticed on the way into Košice, it's quite flat, it's quite big and open. You could probably cover an area the size of Košice quite adequately with that kind of investment. LoRaWAN is an open access technology, and we were lucky because we got some people locally who were very enthusiastic about it, and they got the support of some other people who were also enthusiastic about it, and one of those people had a little bit of funding. Key learning around getting connectivity into your city. It's quite dynamic. So interested in what networks are available in different places. And that's one for technical people to have a conversation with me about. But what we're seeing here is that you see a rapid growth of a particular technology, and then early adopters tend to lose interest a bit. They will go on to the next thing. The person that built the LoRaWAN networks moved on to working with Helium because he was into cryptocurrencies. I think that stuff's all weird, but that's fine. We found someone else, and we gradually took over that infrastructure ourselves. Municipal support for technologies like this could pay quite a lot of dividends. So you get about 20 gateways all installed for around about 20,000 euros. That includes maintenance and ongoing kinds of costs. The biggest challenge we had is finding buildings that you could fit the gateways to. Okay, once you've got the data and it's on the network, you need brokers. A network broker is a platform that takes the data and brings it into a place where you can do things with, gives it an API. So big growth areas around data processing. We're using the Things network as a broker. I'll give you a view of that in just a second. We're using CCAN as a data storage platform. I think a lot of cities are doing that. That's an open source, open data platform. And InfluxDB, which is a real-time database for storing sensor network data. Various other bits and bobs in this, and I'm going to show you these very quickly. So this is the Things network. This is an example of one of the sensors from the Things network, and this is not real time. This is not a real-time demonstration. I'm not that stupid. No way would I attempt something like that at a conference. But this is a leaf moisture sensor that's running in Central Park in Plymouth, and it's taking its payload and it's uploading it to a platform called Node-RED. Node-RED is a visual kind of processing platform, and this has all of the data pipelines in it, and the data comes in on the left and ends up out on the right-hand side in one of these boxes, which is an influx database. From there, we turn it into Grafana dashboards, and Grafana is just another open source technology. This is all kind of off-the-shelf, free technology. We've paid for a small amount of hosting in order to bring this together. So this, when you look at the actual site, is a real-time model of temperatures, humidity, air quality in Central Park in Plymouth. And that's available to all the citizens of Plymouth from anywhere in the world. It's a bit of a DIY platform. We've pushed it together. You can buy off-the-shelf alternatives. So, for example, the Smart Citizen Kit, which has been around for quite some time, we found availability of that kit to be a bit of an issue in the UK. That may be a benefit of our particular governance model at the moment, but that's an all-in-one service. So it's easier to use, but it's a bit less open. It's a bit less flexible. If you want to get hold of the data, you've got to use their platform. The data always ends up on their platform. Great. Key learning points here with data processing is that it's still technically harder than it should be. There's good documentation around individual components, but they tend to assume that you already know a bunch of the other technical things. And so the barriers to entry from a knowledge point of view are quite high. If a locality wants this sort of infrastructure, it needs to invest in onboarding resources, in helping people understand what the technology is and how to use it. Now, I barely scratched the surface of the technology stack here. It's key to providing open real-time data on what's happening in the city. That's acted as a foundation for a lot of the other projects that we've done. So I'm not going to talk too much about reinventing platforms that already exist, because there's quite a lot of it all about. Lots of open source software. Fireware is a thing that's been supported by the EU. Apache Software Foundation have a platform for pretty much anything. Again, low barrier to entry, good documentation and support. If a municipality wants to increase adoption of these kinds of technologies, they need to target funding at those kinds of areas, at the documentation kind of end and the skills end of things. Okay, that's the technology. Data assets. We're very lucky in the UK. We've got a very big statistical service. I think there is one here. I think Slovak have a statistical service. produces a range of key data sets of interest. We use those as foundational data sets when we're working with some of our clients, help them understand their topics or domains or local areas and target services better. And what we will generally do when we're starting a discovery kind of a project is that we'll make a data dictionary, we'll make a catalogue of some of the main bits of open data that are available for people, and actually finding those and curating them and getting them. It can be quite a time-consuming piece of work. This example of these three here, it's an excerpt from Environmental Data Catalogue, which is still a work in progress. Green Minds is a UIA-sponsored program. And we actually hired someone to compile this and to go through all the sources of information on the Environment Agency website and from the ONS and people like that. Also worth saying that we've got a cleaned up series of tools available to us in the UK from a tool called LG Inform Plus, which is an API, and it's full of like aligned data, which is targeted on individual data sets and data points. It's quite up to date with things like the census. It's quite up to date with things like boundary changes, because those happen quite a lot in UK politics. So it's not a fully open data resource, but it's a cleaned up version of open data. Quite interesting this. So this is a screenshot of it. So you can dig down into the tools, or you can go straight for the jugular and go to the API. And I know that data people will like that. They'll like to go to those kinds of things, whereas if you're a bit less confident, you need tools which will kind of guide you through that process. So they've done a reasonably good job of making that happen. Okay, key learning points here with data is that, sorry, I'm getting a reminder on my phone, which is silly. Right, data quality is quite a big problem in the public sphere as well as inside organizations, and we see it when we do consulting within organizations quite a lot. Public data needs a kind of public approach to it, and maintaining open backlogs of those kinds of data is quite good. Use something like Trello or Jira to deliver those. And again, a focus on onboarding and using domain experts to set priorities when it comes to what data is important to keep in your data catalogs. That's also an important thing, and we'll talk about that in the next section quite a lot, because we feel that data needs people, and it's been said in a number of these priorities about having data-driven kind of decision-making, having data providing insights for people, and there's a feeling, and maybe a misconception in some areas, that this means that data is objective. But data isn't objective. There's a warning around this. If you've got a piece of data, someone has chosen to collect that piece of data rather than a slightly different piece of data. Someone's chosen to analyze and process that data in a particular way. Someone's chosen which fields to discard and which fields to keep, which fields to clean up, what reference data to use to clean up. There isn't really such thing as a data-driven decision-making. It's only people that are making those decisions. And I really want to emphasize that. We focus not on big data sets, but on smaller ones. And we focus quite heavily on finding people with domain expertise in order to sort the wheat from the chaff, to sort of work out which data is important and where, and come to rounded decision-making around that. Other groups of people that we're really interested in are those people who can provide funding, and obviously there are big programs of funding, but we're all interested in smaller levels of funding, generally speaking. We're looking for volunteers all the time for technical support. We're looking at who in which community is able and has got the ability and the time to spend helping out the community with their own technical expertise. And also data librarians. So these are people who know what data is available and know what data is important, what data is out there on particular topics. Librarians are some of the most important people in our society because they're the guardians, if you see what I mean. They're the gatekeepers to knowledge, and they're the people that can route you quite fast to the data and resources that you need. We also think events are important to happen. I know that this has been covered in other areas of the talk, and anchor civic organisations, usually that means the municipality. Often municipalities will shy away from this role because they'll think that it It means a commitment in finance. It doesn't always mean that. It sometimes just means putting their name on things. So a few examples of this. These lovely people are Food Plymouth. They're a network of people who grow and run community gardens around Plymouth. Now, Petra mentioned community gardens. This is a great example of how this sort of project can be supported, not top down, but middle out. Food Plymouth are a community organisation, community interest company based in the city. Lady on the left is an awesome woman called Tess, and she's an expert in permaculture. And they run events. We've been to a number of their events and tried to persuade the people who come to put their community gardens on a map. Now, that's actually harder than it sounds. A lot of the people that come to those events maybe don't trust the council. They don't trust the municipality. Trust is in short supply for reasons which I'll go into later. But they're also a bit distrustful of technology, some of them. Plymouth has some very deprived communities and people with quite low levels of data and technical literacy. So we have to be quite careful around that. We've made quite a low-tech map, and here it is. It's taken us, it looks a bit fuzzy from where I am. I hope that looks okay for you. This is a satellite photo of Plymouth. You can see the kind of river and sea, the port area. It's very compact, but there are quite a lot of community gardens, allotments, permaculture areas, people trying to rewild bits of the city, people trying to grow trees in particular places. All of these things make it onto the map. And we're about halfway through a process, really, of trying to go to as many events as we can. There's around 40-odd places, stroke organisations, stroke projects that are now on this map. And it's just a Google map at this point. We're working on a slightly better looking version. But once we get to a critical critical mass of these organisations, we can start looking at it differently. So this is a concept map using a tool called Arrows. Arrows is a prototyping tool for graph databases, and it's produced for free by a company called Neo4j. A concept map basically has an entity and it has relationships, and you define the relationships on the entity. So there's a Green Minds project in the middle. There are partners in blue around the outside. They have the relationship to the project of partner in. Now, as the network grows and as the network gets more meaningful, we're starting to look at and starting to see connections. One of the things that I really hope will happen is that these groups of people will wake up one morning and discover that they're not alone in the city, that they have a kind of power collectively, and that they have the ability to influence policy in particular areas. And in fact, Plymouth have seen this. So the City Council, well, I'll talk about that in a little while. I'll come back to it. Another project we had was about mapping trees in Central Park. In Plymouth, there's a thing called a family tree field. People dedicate trees to loved ones within the field. And we developed a very rough prototype app and went out and mapped trees with a group of people. It was most important to have the people there to map the trees. And of course, it's also important to have the domain expertise. So you want to map a tree, you want to know what the tree is. I have no idea whether I'm looking at a rowan or an ash tree. That's not my area of expertise, but there was someone from the tree partnership there, and he knew what that was. So we eventually mapped all of these trees. Again, these have ended up on quite a rudimentary map. This is Google Maps. There's 150 odd trees on the map, and they're all nicely mapped, and that's on their website now. There's no need for further kind of iteration of this. And this is another feature of some of our projects. They're quite low tech and they're quite transitory. They're almost meanwhile projects in the language that someone used earlier, although I'm not 100% certain what that means. Another project we had in the city was around cargo bikes, e-cargo bikes in the city. There was a group of these bikes delivered to the city council, and a local community interest company had a project to trial a new courier service using these bikes around the city, asked us to prototype an air quality sensor that would be mounted on the bikes. Just as an aside, if you've ever ridden an e-cargo bike, if you've never done that, you should. It's a magical experience. Plymouth has a lot of hills, and just being able to cycle something that big and heavy up a hill, it felt like magic in a lot of ways. Anyway, Lucy prototyped this kit. This uses the LoRaWAN network that I showed you earlier, and some air quality sensors. We were able to get some data from the bikes that went round, and we were able to capture that data. That's great, but we also did some user research in the area, because you should never do these projects without checking in with the domain experts as well. And one of the interesting things that was said was the riders were more concerned about being hit by cars than they are about the air quality. One of the riders says, "I don't care. I can breathe in smog all day. Just don't hit me with a lorry, because that will be the end of me straight away if that happened." Now there are sensor kits that do things like measure the distance that cars have overtaken you with. There are things called open bike sensors. We never got the chance to try all those, but that would be the next thing that we did. So having the domain expertise there, people who understood bikes, people who understood the challenges of riding around the city all day, trying to deliver things using them, that swung the project in a particular direction. It's absolutely vital that you involve those sorts of people. And we had an interesting conversation with them about data governance later on as well, and that's important. Another project which needed a load of domain expertise was a project we had around bees. Honeybees, well, we were asked by a local community interest company called Pollenize if we could measure where their bees were foraging by analysing the video, by taking video of the bees doing the waggle dance. I don't know if people are aware of this. Bees do a particular set of movements when they return to the hive to tell the other bees where food is. And by training cameras on them and running some machine learning work on it, we were able to work out where the bees were going. Now, it's a bit clunky. On the left, you can see our hive set up, and just on the left-hand side of that hive is a camera box, which is welded onto the side of the hive. You take video of the bees every half an hour, upload it to a cloud server, and we sent it to a very clever lady who lived in Athens, who developed a machine learning routine to look at it. And we did, in fact, find out where some of the bees were going. So this is an artist's impression of that picture, because the real picture would have identified where the beekeeper lived and where their hives were, and we don't have permission to show that. So this is something that a picture that Lucy knocked up. We were able to send someone out on a bike to verify that this was actually where the bees were going, and it was a bit of a eureka moment for us. Having said that, there are some scale issues with these sorts of projects, and after more discussions with the domain experts, we felt that another kind of approach would be needed. So a future version of that project will do things a little bit differently, if necessary. And one of the main reasons for that was that shining a light into the beehive disturbs the bees because they are used to working in darkness. So we tried that within an infrared camera. Unfortunately, the bees swarmed that year, and so we lost all our data. But these things happen when you're out collecting doing field work. So there are alternative approaches that we'll consider in the future. Another project that involved domain expertise is the Gender Data Lab. We supported a group in Barcelona called Digital Femmes, who collected data and open data on gender violence and gender discrimination. They were a very skilled group. Digital Femmes, they have developers in-house. So we've provided them with the platform, and they've customized the platform. This is a great resource. It's still in beta stages. When you work with a group like that, and you've seen open data projects before, you have a tendency to want to intervene, but we tried not to do that. We tried to let them just do it themselves and find out how things would work or not. So mistakes sometimes get made in projects like these when you're collaborating, but that's a learning opportunity for people. You shouldn't try and stop the mistakes from happening all the time. And I know this from working with councils and working for my local municipality, is that they are likely to try and stop you from making mistakes. Don't let them do that. Municipalities should let citizens make mistakes. I think it's really important to do that. So some of these projects cost a little bit of money, but not huge amounts of money. So for example, you can buy a cloud server for 20 euros a month. Micro grants can help these data services get off the ground, trial themselves out, and maybe go for bigger pots of funding later on, or find commercial models. They don't need to have large amounts of money thrown at them, but they do need a little bit, just enough to make it happen or become self-funding in future. Now, voluntary sector support organizations are very good at finding these sorts of grants. We're very lucky. We have an organization called Plymouth Octopus Project, or POP, and octopus, kind of, yeah, on their logo. They know everyone in the city. They know all the civic organizations in the city. They know where all the funding is buried. Great organization, exists to coordinate support to these community organizations. If you have an organization like this in your area, please look after them. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed up a little. Also, I mentioned this earlier, civic technologists, they're a job that are needed. A lot of these projects know people who have a bit of time on their hands, have a bit of skill. They don't need to be completely skilled at it. These are low-tech projects. You do need to build resilience around these people, so maybe this is a job that can be shared in some areas. They do need to go on holiday occasionally. Plymouth City Council also ran a lot of events, and we supported those events, data play events they're called. They've now run 11 of them. They're great ways to introduce data to the local digital community. Very good and high energy kinds of events. And it earned a lot of trust with local people. Trust which, unfortunately, evaporated a few weeks ago when the City Council cut down a load of very mature trees in the city centre against the will of a lot of local people. And so trust is hard to earn and easy to lose. I think that's probably what I ought to just leave it at that. Key issue for a lot of localities is skills, helping the general public understand what's available out there, doing user-centered design. It's an area that's not given enough attention for data projects, but as it is for transactional services at this point with municipalities. That is changing and improving as time goes on. Okay, very quickly, I just want to talk about one last thing, which is about governance of data programs. Now, in municipalities, open data is a program, and internally it needs its own particular governance group. We have worked with Bristol to try and help their open data program and develop a kind of Racky matrix to see who's responsible for what within the city. Interesting. Also, on the other end of the scale, people are starting to become more aware of what personal data is being given to them, and platforms are starting to emerge that act as brokers for people's personal information. So these are platforms like MyDex in the UK. There are other platforms elsewhere. They're starting to be used more, and they've not quite ironed out some of the issues, I think, with how their user journey works. But I think that is only a matter of time, really. These initiatives need more development and support. They're pushing against technology trends towards centralization of data. More interesting and more developed is the idea of a data trust. So they're a bit of an emerging concept, and we tried to develop one for the data being collected by the cargo bikes. So a data trust is a third-party organization, a legal organization, that is authorized to handle data sharing and governance with other organizations. So like a union, effectively. There's a couple of links on there. When you get the slides, you'll have a quick look at that. We developed this kind of ecosystem or value network map model with the cargo bike riders. And this shows the value kind of, this was an attempt to showcase the value proposition with that kind of domain specific data. Quite interesting this, because we felt that the City Council would have actually paid them in some ways for the air quality data, because they collect air quality data at quite some expense. So that's quite an interesting area. Another approach to this is with an organisation we're supporting at the moment called Prospect Brixham. Brixham is a town just up the coast from Plymouth, about 20,000 people. Lucy's nodding, I think, in the darkness. And they're interested in making a hyper-local data trust, so a data trust that will pool all the information about a particular place, including some personal data, and come up with ways to come up with ways to use that better, ways to exploit it for the benefit of local people. And that's the key thing, is that trust. Okay, I know that I've overrun a little bit on time. So these are kind of a summary of our attitude. Again, is very UK-centric, very coloured by our local political landscape, so different situations in different places. But we still feel that these things are true, that participation beats a purely technical innovation, that platforms come and go, but communities will remain. The communities themselves need to be able to directly benefit from their own data assets and then design their own. Going forward, they will need those skills in the future in order to be resilient. Funding models are fragile, at least they are where we come from. So top-down programs only last as long as the funding. You need to design that longer-term approach into them. And resilience means things like, boring things like redundancy, succession planning, risk management. These aren't always things that communities are good at. They need to be helped in those kinds of areas. But municipalities are very good at those things because they've got that kind of juice. There's a bit of knowledge transfer that could maybe happen there. Finally, local municipalities should be aiming to plug the gaps, the small gaps that make a big difference. And they need to be a bit smarter around that. So on that note, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was a very, very interesting presentation. I didn't know that so much around data could be connected to local communities. Do we have any question from the audience? Yeah, I see Petra here.
Thanks, Martin. My question is...
Can we?
It's not
Hello?
Yeah, okay.
It's working now. Thank you, Martin. My question is around data and well-being. If you've been involved in any project where any well-being indicators have been measured, it's a bit tricky because in the lunch break I was asked this question and I actually realized I haven't really got a very clear answer. And because well-being is so important now in connection with placemaking and for cities, but local authorities and administrations, they just need the evidence. And how can we provide that evidence on those things that are very hard to measure? If you have any experience on projects that look at those very hard to measure well-being and related.
Yeah, the short answer is no, we haven't, not explicitly. The Green Minds UIA supported project does have well-being as a measure because green spaces are known to increase well-being. And access to green spaces are known to increase well-being, but it's not been a specific well-being. So no is the answer, I'm afraid. It'd be an interesting area to work on, though, and there's a lot of public health kind of data that comes through that. And we know people that have worked in public health organisations as well from our background and from our contacts. So yeah, I'd be very interested in working on those sorts of projects.
Okay, any other question? We might have time for one more.
Tiež som mal túto otázku. Dokumentáciu fotografií alebo slajdov, ktoré boli použité.
Could you please speak English?
If you can't.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have no Slovak.
The photography you used show mostly older people. How it is cooperation with youth?
Okay, that's interesting. So younger people obviously tend to be more technically literate and also a bit less interested in some of the work we do. We do try and access groups of people that wouldn't necessarily use technology if we can, but we have done quite a lot of training kind of work with younger people. Particularly, we do sort of data analysis training, data science training, those kinds of things. So we've worked on a skills level with those people, and they have been involved in some levels with the building and ongoing input to that infrastructure.
Okay.
Sorry, there's a follow-up.
How it is the initiative of youth in your town?
Sorry, could you say that again, please?
Is there any youth initiative in your town?
Okay, in Plymouth, yes, there are several. initiatives around that, and but they all happen through our partners. We don't directly access them. So, for example, the company that work with the bees, they have a big youth outreach program with like bee-friendly seeds into schools and those sorts of things. But we don't engage them directly in the data. It's an area that's missing, but we're quite a small company, so we don't cover all of the bases in that way.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. A round of applause.
Thank you.